Yes, sir. Roll call. Mayor Haney.
Here.
Mayor Haney present. Mr. O'Rourke.
Here.
Mr. O'Rourke present. Miss Landing.
Here.
Miss Landing present. Howard Chapman is absent.
Thank you very much. So the chair declares that we do have a quorum present. This is the 11 a.m. Meeting on Monday, May 4th of the Flood Resilience Committee. As we are well aware, happened during the COVID crisis, our flood issues continue to need to be addressed. I want to say at the start, Eric, thanks to you and to our hardworking public services staff. I believe they were out all night during that last event. And we just wanted to see what we can do as a committee and as council to try to continue to address this. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes from the March 2nd, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion?
I'll move for approval.
I'll second it.
Good. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes as published, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The minutes are approved. Item 4 is public comments. People were given the chance to comment by 3 p.m. on Sunday, May the 3rd. Those comments that were received by then will be included in the minutes of this as public comment. However, if you did not make the deadline or if you're tuning in today, we will see everything you send us that's addressing flooding. I know I've gotten several from residents after the almost unprecedented event that we had not too long ago. We will put those into the minutes. Item number 5 is possible funding sources for planned drainage projects and efforts to identify such. I know that committee members have been looking. I ran into Howard just in town hall, and since his background, this goes back to like the day after the event or whatever, and I have mentioned to him and sent him a message if he could use his transportation background. Since Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, most of what we're doing is on state transportation infrastructure. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. Okay,
and that goes to Tom and to Kathy. Any phone calls, any contact you have, anybody you know at the state, let's shake every bush. The state has not put money into our stormwater drainage, especially on the parts of town where they own 75% of the roadways in 50 or 60 years. So, Eric, I guess we will defer to staff on this about possible funding sources. It doesn't have to be a whole compendium of every possible source, but especially what can we as council members do now to find a way to get to funding the drainage that we've paid, close to $1 million to study and design the fix for?
That's right, sir. And well, good morning, Mayor, members of the committee. The number one thing we could use support with is to any effort you can provide to shake loose money from higher levels of government, the state of South Carolina, DOT, and certainly with FEMA. You all are aware that the amount that was approved for us, authorized by DOT for the 2 basins in the old village, that money was pulled. One was about 500,000, the other about 750. But through all this, whether it's in the old village or it was in Snee Farm or it's in Hobcaw, we've reached out to the state and also to FEMA to try to seek funds. And just so you know, we've requested just over $12.6 million in FEMA aid to help us in the 2 basins in the old village that we're designing now. And we're expected to hear that announcement as to whether we were successful or not come mid-July. And as for Hobcaw, we have a similar grant in with FEMA. We requested $4 million. All this money has a match to it. And we're hopeful, very hopeful, because that is a submission we made following Hurricane Florence. And we're hopeful about that. And we're expected to hear something in June. So July for the application into FEMA for the old village, June for Hobcaw. In addition to that, we have requested 300,295 to be exact, from the South Carolina Rural Infrastructure Authority. And we're hopeful that money will come through and can help us with some other projects. That money is really more for some smaller projects that we can help other neighborhoods in town to with their stormwater situation.
How much was that, Eric?
It was 295,000. So.
Okay.
There's also opportunities through the state revolving fund. That is the funding source we use to complete the project we did in Sneed Farm. Has a low interest rate, a very favorable interest rate. The trouble for us with that is going to be making the repayment.
Right.
A funding source for that. So one last thing, and this was taken up at Finance Committee, was the approval of the hazard mitigation grant. That will be funds that will come to us from the federal government to help the town pinpoint the highest areas of vulnerability town-wide. So whatever funding we're able to receive and shake loose over time, we'll know truly the worst areas town-wide and be able to strategize and apply that money to those areas first.
Would you give us a quick update on a little bit of history and funding that we have spent so far, I believe, with Thomas and Hutton on the design and fix of our most problematic areas?
I'd be happy to, sir. Both of those basins, there's 27 basins in the Old Village. The worst two were Royal and Edwards Park. Royal design is 99% complete. We're just waiting on the permitting. Same thing with Edwards. Estimated cost of the Royal Basin is $5.85 million. And the estimated cost for the Edwards Park Basin is just under $7 million at 6.8. Jody is on the line. Jody, any more details you'd like to share with regard to the design or the process?
No, sir. Well, I know that Rick Karkowski is on the line also, and then Rick can add anything to us. In reference to design, there's one thing that we're waiting on at the end of Royal. There is a private property that's owned by individuals, just marshland, and we're waiting on working through the legal part with him on that. And I know that Rick and them are working on Edwards Park. They're finalizing the pump station, the upgrades to the pump station there. What we'll be doing is we'll be taking a % of the flow that would be coming to the pump station away from the pump station and developing another outfall on Queen Street. Other than that, I could give you a little bit of history if you want more history about it in reference to the storm that we had recently. I'd be more than happy to share that information with you.
If you'll hold on, that is our next item on the agenda. And once we get through the funding, and that will be very helpful. So we'll get right to that in just a second. Eric.
May I ask
Ms.
a question?
Landy.
Thank you. In regard to what Mr. Peel just said, Jody, you were describing, I believe, the project that we started on last year or year and a half, 2 years ago on the more gravity-based mechanism and that's where the second outfall came up, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. That's the second outfall for the Edwards Park Basin.
How much, when that's completed, how much will that impact? How much will that help Edwards not be quite as bad in terms of flooding? How much impact do you think?
And Rick, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're taking about 65% away from Edwards and you're taking it to Queen. And therefore, the pump station that's at Edwards Park will be able to handle the storm that we're designing the system to.
That's correct, Jody. You know, the instead of making the pump station bigger, we're taking 3/5 of the basin that's going to it to a new outfall, and then the remaining 2/5 that's going to the pump station will allow that pump station to function at a much higher level of service. It'll be able to handle the larger events for the smaller area that would be draining to it at that point.
So I remember from Public Services Committee, maybe even as much as 2 years ago now, when we had the proposal and we made the decision to go to a gravity-based system, Now that's just about been totally executed. So if when that's done and we have an event, would a study, if a study was done at that point on Edwards, would it actually look a lot better than it did when the original studies were done?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to move past, these are every event's different, but, we're going to a level of service of a 10-year event. And, right now it's like everything's below like a 2-year event. So, we will see, on average, if nothing is done, we'll see flooding just about every year. But if we do this project, it'll get, you'll still have flooding. We're still going to have bigger events than what it can handle, but it'll be much, much less severe, and it should be a lot less frequent.
So could I ask then, as a clarification, we're saying if we do this project, isn't this is the gravity-based system that we're already working on, right? Right, Mr. Peel?
Yeah. But we still got to get it. It's got to get, we're like everybody's reported, all the permits are in, and, I'm happy to report we do have our wetland critical area permits. The DOT is just waiting on us to wrap up some of the other permits. And then, so the permitting's almost done, but then we still got to build it. We still got, that's going to take, some funding, of course.
Ms. Landing, let me make sure you're clear. We haven't started the construction phase. We're in the design phase.
Right.
Okay, just want to make sure you're clear on that. So,
Right. And I knew that in regard to the earlier conversation. I thought in regard to the outfall and the gravity base, that was a different subject, but okay, I got it. Thank you.
Rick, thank you for joining us. And let me ask if I'm clear. Is that second outfall, does it only happen if we get funding for and do the entire project? Or is that a interim step that can be taken before we come up with the whole $12 million to fix both basins?
Well, of course, any part of the project, we could phase this project over multiple, years and multiple, time period. We have to do it in a sequential, like, engineering kind of process, starting downstream to upstream. And so the short answer is no, we don't have to come up with the full $12 million, but there is a part of that 12 million that is devoted to the second outfall. We would have to put that entire second outfall in at once to really do it. So, I don't have that number in front of me, but we certainly could look at that phasing number.
So Eric, is this making sense? This is where we're kind of going with both of these sequentially. Is it an all or nothing scenario just from the finances? I get the engineering. You have to engineer from downstream to upstream. You can't be sending water somewhere it has nowhere to go. But, and I think what Ms. Landing is asking is there a way that we can get to this, we can get a figure on that second outfall, take the pressure off of Edwards Park and start working on that outfall while we figure, Ms. Landing, is that what you were asking?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You're talking about phasing, and that's a possibility. But please know that that would have a limited effectiveness until the project is complete. Most of the flooding is in the interior of the basin.
Right. I get it.
Okay.
I understand. One of the things I've been trying to get us to, and we've all been trying to get us to all along, and as there are proposals to raise stormwater fees or do bond indebtedness or something, I think it's hard for our citizens / taxpayers to feel good about things when they're not seeing interim measures. If we can phase things and say we're working on this outfall first, that helps this, and we've got an overall plan, I think it's easier to feel. And I hate to just talk about feelings, but all our phones were ringing off the hook. What was it, a week ago Thursday, whenever that was? And that was a lot of hard work by our public services and a lot of calls that we got about water. And I'm just looking for ways that it's not an all or nothing, that we can take steps and get there. But one of the things I've learned, and Kathy, you've been on public services too, and Jody and them showed me going back 5 years, is we've got places in the old parts of town where there is nowhere for water to go, right, Jody? Like Atlantic Street, there's nowhere for water to go. Your sound's off.
Yes, sir, you're correct.
Okay. So do I hear from the committee that, and I don't think we need to vote, and Tom, you've disappeared from my screen, but I'm sure you're still on
Yeah,
here.
that's why you didn't see my hand waving. I wanted to make a comment, and Eric, I usually warn you before my comments, but I didn't get a chance to warn you on this one. But wow, I feel so strongly that we need to deal with this. I do. And I know that we're hurting. I just left the finance committee meeting. We talked about the budget, but there were two things mentioned that we don't have 100% guarantee of yet that I thought were encouraging. One is to create a budgetary line item of almost $3.7 million for just in case. And the just in case is going to hit us. We know that. The second thing was we may not need, if we really suck it up, we may not need to go into fund balance. We can't make a decision now, and we can't agree to fund this now. But there are families living in that old village that when the rain hits their roof, they go to anxiety that they really, quite frankly, shouldn't have to go to. And I think we've got to take care of these people that live here, have lived here first before we do anything else. And I would like to see us find a way to appropriate the money that came from the grant funding that we lost to see if we can finish these projects. Phasing, to me, sounds really good. All it is a way to delay things. And I'm not so sure if we delay a long time, that we may have to redesign. I don't know. But I wish that we could, with the express purpose of trying to find the money to do this, wait till our picture becomes a little bit more clear and kind of suck it up and do it. That's what I wish we could do.
Could I
Yes.
interject, Mayor?
Planning?
Okay, so a couple things on that. First of all, I think in phasing, we keep throwing these different terminologies around, and maybe it's just not clear, but I think all along the idea was to take the worst, the one that was the highest priority first, which was Royal, then Edwards, and then go on. And I'm not sure, I think having everything torn up to do all of this at one time is probably not practical anyway. And I remember asking Mr. DeMora when we were talking about this last year, how much money would be needed in order to actually get started as soon as the permits were ready. And if I remember correctly, and hopefully the number hasn't changed that much, it was about 2.2 million, something in the 2.2 million or so. Maybe it's slightly off. Mr. DeMora, does that sound right?
It sounds right. I have to go back and look, but that
Yeah.
sounds right.
But in the ballpark, its numbers are usually something I remember pretty well. So, so I know we have to, in order to have something as a project, you have to have it funded. So the idea was not to say we're going to phase out over some incredibly long period of time, but rather that just start with the worst, which would be about 5.6 or whatever million that Royal was, of which about 2.2 million would be this year, and that make sure that that is fully funded. And then once we get going on that, then as other things come to light, we're waiting for the FEMA grants. We don't know what the SCDOT situation, why, we know why they pulled it, but we don't totally understand it because they haven't done much of anything else for us. So we need to go back and put some pressure on the state because they should be helping with this. But let's just start with what we know. And Mr. O'Rourke, your idea, Tom, your idea about can we use some of our money? Can we carve out some money? That was one of the things we discussed. Maybe we do need to carve a little bit of money from places to get started. But the funding for the first project is what we should start because that's the one that's almost ready to be permitted.
Can y'all give me just a little summary, and those that weren't watching the finance committee meeting of, Tom, you touched on it a little bit, but kind of where is finance looking at this? What are y'all looking at?
Yeah, so here it is in a nutshell. And Eric, please jump in when I sound stupid. We don't know right now. We don't know. We know we're going to get hit in almost every single revenue line item, which will change things. But what staff has done, what we think is a really good job of, is looked at the things that we can slow down, take away, or stop that will enable us to get through this budget year. There are some really important capital projects that might just have to stop right now. And the funding for that was going to be approximately $3.7 million. So we're looking at creating a line item in the budget, in the executive budget, that will pretty much hold this money to let us see when we will need it or not need it. But what we have to understand is that's not money we found that's like free money. This is money we've stopped on right now. So I believe that in the next year to 18 months, there's going to be some real reprioritization by the 9 of us in our dollars. So what Marcy and Eric have done, I believe, is created a plan to get us to be able to approve a budget in July, but keep our eye on everything so that as the real numbers come in, and they're not going to come in until after the budget's done, then we're able to make better educated decisions, all 9 of us, as it relates to those things. So, but what could happen in the budget is if we set that line item aside in that budgetary line item, and you know, Eric's done it every year, but if he finds a way to conserve and squeeze and tighten, there could be some money left over in that fund at the end of the year. So what Marcy and Eric will do at the budget committee meeting is to explain it all out to all of us, this and then figure out what to do from there. Eric, can you fill in some gaps?
I think you nailed it, Tom, Mr. Mayor. What we're looking at is a multi-level approach to address the matter, and we're executing just about all of those items right now. And what you'll see in the budget that arrives to you first at Budget Committee is essentially reducing the hardest hit budgets like hospitality and accommodations, and then creating a contingency reserve of all salary type money, honestly. And adding all those up, we're close to $5 million just on hold. And then we're looking at other capital projects that have some kind of operational impact that we could hold on. Some, as you know, Mayor, are maybe they're paid with impact fees or something, and we couldn't use them for operations anyway. So those, and the time may be favorable, like a transportation project, may be favorable to move forward with them. So we're sort of reshaping the budget that was proposed to everyone a couple months back into something that gets us started into the new year.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the recap on that. That sounds excellent. Look forward to seeing that come before all of council.
Yeah.
So let's on this item number 5, as we talk about funding sources, one of the things I would like for us to do, and Eric, it may take some staff guidance and help to do this. Let's get a memo, a letter to our legislative delegation, to our federal delegations, and say, this is a serious problem. I was telling my wife the other night when we were having that rain event, and not that our people weren't working hard, or not that even if we had a 10-year, design, a capability that a 50-year event wouldn't have overwhelmed it in some ways. But it's not senators and congressmen and state senators and state reps that gets called. It's us. It's the people in local government. And this is the hard part of local government. If we can get a letter out and say, we're working on a plan, we know where the fixes are, and here's the price tag. Let's make sure that A, we're on the record of asking for their help, and B, letting them know one more time. And I know, like when we entertained them up in Columbia barely 60 days ago, we told them this, and I think they will help us. But let's get a letter written, Eric, that, staff can put the details in about this funding. And let's say, the rubber meets the road here, and this is what we need help with now. Does that sound good to y'all? Tom?
Yeah.
Kathy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. And then I like the phased approach, and we can look at that, which I think that leads us to agenda item number 6. Is there anything we can do to mitigate the negative impacts in the interim? And I know that there are some engineering things here, and Rick, you're here, and Jody, you're here. I hate, especially for like Atlantic Street, we know there is no, if you pump water away from one resident's house, you're sending it to another resident's house. You know, is there anything we can do in the interim when we have another one of these downpours to keep water from getting onto our residents' property as best we can, or to get less water onto their property?
Jody, you want to take a crack at that, Jody?
Yes, sir. Well, so everyone understands that when we have a rain event, we have crews that are in south of Mount Pleasant, central, and north.
Yeah.
We're touring the areas to look at grates and areas that we know that are prone to flood, and we remove the vegetation on tops of grates and in boxes. We have pumps set up at Kincaid. We have pumps set up at Freeman and Pitt and Ferry. Even though with the pump set up on Kincaid, the amount of water, the intensity of water that came down in the 2 hours came to be approximately a 50-year storm. And we know the infrastructure within Mount Pleasant and Pacific areas can't even handle a 1-year storm or a 2-year storm. So Kincaid, even with us pumping Kincaid with 2 pumps in place, Kincaid flows down Chuck Dolly and in turns to go to Freelock. There was places that were flooded on Coleman at Warwick that was underwater, and Shermer was underwater. So I was basically pumping Kincaid in a circle. It was nowhere, it wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. So after about an hour and a half, finally, it started flowing, and Shermer and the intersection of Warwick and Coleman had receded. Now, when you go to Atlantic Street is basically, if I'm not mistaken, it is a closed basin. There's nowhere I can push it, nowhere I can pump it. I can try to run it all the way down Fairmont, but we had problems on Fairmont because Fairmont goes the same way to Freelock, and some of it goes to the pump station. It was underwater. So, I mean, we've tried our best. We know where we can pump, and we know where it hurts us to pump. Let's use Freeman. I was pumping Freeman dry, but I was sending it to Pitt and Ferry, which was underwater.
Right.
So I'm basically adding more water to an area that's already flooded.
Right.
The only other thing we could talk about it is when we talk about phasing in, and I would like to have a longer discussion about, do we go to Edwards first or do we go to Royal first? Because I don't think you're going to see the bang for your buck on Royal that you may see it if we can tie it into Edwards. So I'm a little concerned because you've got to go a long way to help anybody on Royal, and that's getting up and towards the Atlantic in that area. Whereas I may be able to help people a lot quicker if you look at Edwards first. So we need to really think about where we're going first if we're going to phase this in, and where we can get the biggest bang for the buck.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Mayor, Jody,
Eric?
if
Yes.
I may, thank you. Some communities have pump plans, and you take an area, say like the Old Village part of town, and there are pumps. There's a pump designed for the area that manages the water. We sort of operate a similar thing here, and it's a different basin. There's all kinds of other different things that have to deal with tides and other things that don't make that kind of a plan really successful for us more than it already is. But I will say that to Jody and to Rick, our engineer, perhaps guys, hearing the mayor and council's feedback today, perhaps we need to go back. Don't need to have the discussion now. It's not our meeting, but look at a phasing plan and the engineering of how that may work that meets the goals of the committee. And it may turn out, as you were saying, that because of the limited funds that we have, and that it may be better to do something on the Edwards side. One last thing, Mayor. FEMA does pay, you mentioned short-term solutions. FEMA does pay for flood-prone properties.
Right.
And we've never really kind of gone there before because we didn't want someone to have to make that very tough decision. But that is a possibility. A property that could just hold water, wouldn't help the entire basin, but it would help a little bit, and would certainly, that property owner would be relieved of that burden.
Yeah, I was thinking all things on the table. I know we've got some property owners who are concerned that they could never sell their property because it's so flood prone and all those things. And I don't want to make, reckless assertions or anything like that. But I was wondering, or are there small parts of vacant lots we could buy and use for retention? And we're talking worst case scenarios, or the backs of parking lots. And I know I'm blue skying, and Jody, you've been dealing with this stuff for 30 years, but you were talking about there's nowhere to pump water. Is there any possible interim way we can acquire a place to which we could pump water?
And that goes back to what Eric was saying, is do we acquire property? But if we acquire property, there is going to be a time you're going to reach a storm that is going to exceed the banks of that pond. So
Right.
It's just there for containment.
Right.
And Rick,
Yes. Yep.
well, I mean, you've got a lot of history, Mayor, if you don't mind me saying, Rick, you got a lot of history in this type thing. Comments that could be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, my one comment is, and every little bit helps. I'm concerned that the possible scale of like a single lot or two, it being able to make, and I use the term move the needle on when we're talking about flooding, like particularly structural flooding, we're talking about like incredible amounts of water. And in a small like quarter acre or even like a half acre pond probably doesn't bring the level of relief that is going to, like I said, move the needle. So again, it's a hard realization, but we're trying to affect a very large amount of water, and it takes a very large system, and that's my comment, if you will. But I guess the one thing about the pump plans, of course, I mean, I'm actually pulled out some of the maps now and I'm kind of looking at them. You are hemmed in by some pretty large roads, and it would be hard to lay some pump hoses across those roads to get them to a place where they could get into another system and drain out and things. But we certainly could explore that if that's the way to go. If we want to work this emergency management pump plan where we would mobilize emergency pumps for these events and things like that. But that's all I got.
Okay. Rick, were y'all part of, or did y'all attend any of the findings of the Dutch dialogues down in Charleston?
Yes,
one of the things, and I do not claim to know much about engineering at all, and I'm not trying to meddle in your profession, but they were just saying to think differently, try new ideas, more judo than boxing with floodwater. It's coming anyway. It's how we handle it, that we can't stop it and all that. So if there's anything that came out of those findings that can help us in our design for our troublesome areas, and something that we need to know, y'all let us know, no matter how outside the box it may seem.
Absolutely. And I did participate in the full Dutch dialogue. We was cited in there. We contributed a significant amount to it.
Right.
And so we'll certainly review that. But again, working with a area that was developed, decades ago, and with not clear path of how the drainage is going to work, and they just built onto it as they went. And so we're kind of stuck in this problem of having to try to re-engineer it.
Right. And let's all remember, we did pass a 40% impervious surface coverage rule for this flood-prone area. You never know if that'll have any effect. It might slow down. It won't correct the situation, but hopefully it won't exacerbate the situation any more than it already is. And Tom, you and I have had the conversation before. I don't know if it's legal or not, But when it comes to stormwater fees, the person with an 850 square foot, old house in the village pays the exact same stormwater fee as a person who buys one, tears it down, and builds a 6,000 square foot house. Right. And all that. And the disproportionate nature of the stormwater fee has always kind of bothered me. I don't know what the state law allows us to do on that, but I think you and I have had that conversation before.
Right.
So, I guess, and Jody and Eric, to wrap up on that item number 6 about mitigation, helpful interim things we can do to mitigate. Keep us posted on those. Jody, comments well taken about which basin to get the most bang for our buck on. And so we've got interim things that we'll try to do immediately. And then we've got the big picture things where we've got to go after that funding. And Tom and Kathy, thank y'all for the insight from the Finance Committee. And that's one reason this committee is comprised of who it is, because it's money and it's stormwater drainage. And that's what it is.
Right.
So anything else, committee members, any other questions or comments before we adjourn?
No, sir.
Kathy?
Nope, nothing here.
Eric or Jody, did we hit the points?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And Rick, thank y'all very much for the work y'all done, and thank you for your insight today. Item number 7 is to adjourn, and so this committee meeting will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.